Welcome to Tuesday's edition of COVID-19. I'm Min San-hee. A silver bullet for COVID-19 may never be found. This is according to the World Health Organization. Officials there are thus calling for practical steps to confront the pandemic, such as testing, tracing, social distancing, and face mask wearing. Now, we start the program with the latest figures on the pandemic with our Kwon So-ah and related news with our Kim Da-mi. So I hear there's been a rise in domestic cases here in Korea on this Tuesday.
That's right, Sunny, and mainly in the metropolitan region due to cluster infections, including at a coffee shop and a restaurant in the capital, Seoul.
And imported cases remain in the double digits too, then?
Yes, as of this Tuesday, that is, of course, for the 40th consecutive day. So let's take a closer look at the figures now. We have 34 new cases this Tuesday, raising the total to 14,423. The death toll remains unchanged at 301, and we have 770 people in quarantine, which means the number has dropped to below 800, which we haven't been seeing lately. Now we have 13,352 recoveries, with 72 people having been discharged from treatment or hospitals in the past day. And let's move over to our graph now. We do see that after we had a decline for 3 consecutive days, we are back to the 30s, and the low 30s is also the average that we've been seeing in the past in this 8-day span. And let's take a look at our map now. As you can see, most of the new cases are concentrated in the metropolitan region, with 9 in the capital Seoul, 11 in Gyeonggi-do province, and 1 in Incheon. And we also have 21 cases are imported cases, with 7 of those having been detected at the nation's airport or seaports, and 14 were foreigners, while 7 were Korean nationals. And this Tuesday, the highest number of infections from overseas was from the U.S., with 9 related cases. So with that, let's take a look at the major outbreaks here. We have the U.S. here, of course, on top with some 4.86 million cases. But actually, the daily figures have been declining to below 50,000 now in the U.S. And then we've got Brazil at 2.75 million and India at 1.85 million, followed by Russia, South Africa, and Mexico. And speaking of Mexico, many Latin American countries are still in the top 10 and top 12. Let's take a look at the next table. Peru, Chile, and Colombia. A big concern here, as Colombia added more than 10,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. And let's take a look at the total figures. 18.4 million cases in total around the world, with more than 200,000 new cases and 697,000 fatalities, with 11.67 million recoveries. And those are the updates I have for now, but I'll be back with more after the government briefing. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, so thank you for that. I'll see you back at the desk. The impact of the pandemic has been pervading every aspect of our lives, including our workplace and the way we work. From the hiring process to the working environment, employees and employers across the globe are adapting to a new normal. For more on this, I have our Kim Da-mi here in the studio. Welcome, Da-mi.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Now, Da-mi, let's begin with the changes in the working environment, as many are being advised to stay at home to handle their professional affairs from their private quarters.
Right.
Tell us more.
So hundreds of thousands of workers here in the country are holed up in their homes, which have become their new workspace. Actually, a lot of local business are encouraging employees to work from home to prevent the transmission of COVID-19. A local survey shows that nearly half of the respondents have found remote working to be efficient, mostly due to the lack of commute times, unnecessary meetings, and other menial tasks.
I love that my commute is shorter and that I can really focus on my work because I'm alone. Also, we've replaced regular face-to-face meetings with video chats and online messengers, which work just fine. But there are also limitations, like it sometimes takes longer to get work done in a chat room.
My schedule looks the same as work from home, starts from 9 and ends at 6. Only the difference is getting up later and eating dinner a little earlier.
Working remotely can reduce work stress and eliminate hectic commutes, but for some people, it can be a burden.
I have to take care of my children because all the kindergartens and schools are postponing the new semester. After being told to stay home, I work and look after my kids at the same time.
Experts note that teleworking is unlikely to be a fleeting trend. If anything, the abundance of related new technology hitting the market is a clear indicator that these changes are here to stay.
Different kind of apps and businesses that allow you to have a more productive time and more enjoyable time at home while working. Definitely, we'll have to bet on that side as well for future investment.
And that is precisely why this trend, I understand, Tami, is universal.
Right, exactly. There appears to be a similar shift. Actually, around 8% of all workers who are sent home have returned to the office. And Google is actually letting its employees work from home for another year, a move that shows the tech industry is bracing for a long pandemic. Google CEO Sundar Pichai emailed Google employees late last month that the company is extending its global voluntary work from home option through the end of June 2021. For roles that they don't need to be in the office. That means nearly 200,000 full-time and contract workers will continue to work from home for the time being. Elsewhere, Twitter is allowing its employees to work from home for as long as they want, even if the pandemic draws to a conclusion. So Twitter employees can choose to work remotely on a permanent basis if they're not required to be in the office. Those who wish to return to the office can do so, but they won't reopen until September at the earliest.
I see. Tami, hiring practices have also marked a shift amid the pandemic, I hear.
Right, to minimize physical contact, local firms are now using online platforms to hire workers. Samsung Group actually held online recruitment exams for the first time back in June. Applicants took the test at home under remote supervision from Samsung.
I'll check the applicants' environments one by one. Please follow my instructions as I call out your name. For the rest of the applicants, please stand by with your face towards the camera.
With Samsung leading the way, some say the demand for remote hiring may increase in the future. They also note that it saves time and expenses compared to offline recruitment.
This non-contact recruitment can reduce the spread of COVID-19 and the time and cost of the existing hiring process. I think it's going to continue to be an option in the future.
But of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken away hundreds of thousands of jobs. In fact, LG Group will scrap its annual open recruitment period with a year-round hiring system for the second half of the year. For the last 6 decades, LG has been hiring employees in 2 batches every year. They will now hire over 70% of their new workers through corporate internship programs.
Tami, meanwhile, there also appears to be much government support for remote working. Please tell us more about that.
Right, so the government plans to offer both small and mid-sized firms up to $16,000 each to really set up remote working equipment and software. It will also invest some $2 million into developing 5G virtual reality and hologram conferencing apps to further support work-from-home policies. Plus, there's also South Korea's ambitious New Deal project, which aims to create nearly 2 million new jobs in green and digital industries.
All right, Tami, thank you for that report. Hope to see you again soon.
My pleasure.
Right, we turn now to the regular government briefing on COVID-19. As mentioned at the start of the program, the global health body has dismissed hopes for a prompt and simple solution to the pandemic and instead called for practical and sensible measures to minimize its spread. The measures include the efforts being made and advised by our health authorities from the start of the pandemic. They are testing, tracing, social distancing, and of course the wearing of face masks when outside your home. Adding on to these measures are new guidelines for vacationers here in Korea at the nation's beaches. Now, the list includes a number of safety precautions, with the first calling on efforts to refrain from visiting popular beaches that are likely to be crowded during this summer. Visitors should also avoid going to these places in large groups and choose to keep their groups small, within family members, that is. Meanwhile, beach parasols should be placed 2 meters apart from each other, again to ensure a healthy distance from those around you to minimize the possible spread of the virus. Masks should be worn at all times when outside the water as well. Yet another rule that visitors should keep in mind is that they should not spit in the water when they are there and enjoying the sea. The briefing is about to start, so we'll come back to you afterwards with a summary of it.
Let us now begin our regular briefing for August 4th on the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. As of today midnight, we have 13 new local infections and a total of 21 new imported cases. And therefore, the total number of confirmed cases now stands at 14,423. 72 more people have been discharged following full recovery, while 770 people are in quarantine. And there are a total of 13 patients with severe or critical conditions, and we had no additional fatality. However, as of 10 a.m. today, one person born in 1930 has passed away, and we also extend our deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved families. Here are some major updates of our domestic infections today. Related to a coffee shop in Gwangnam-gu District, Seoul City, and in relation to a restaurant in Yangjae, we have 2 additional cases, and the total has now increased to 12. And we are now analyzing the results. And there was one on the 27th of July, and also there has been an increase in the daily, and we also see the first index case being confirmed at 26. However, we believe that the first symptoms were shown on 24th of July. The residents, 2 of them were from Seoul, and 1 from Gyeonggi-do Province, and 1 from Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. And looking at the risk factors within the coffee shop, they held a meeting and they wore a face mask inappropriately. And at the same time, when they were at the restaurants as well, aside from eating, when they were engaging in dialogue, they did not wear the face masks appropriately. Next, moving on to Gyeonggi-do Province, in relation to a military unit in Pocheon City, we also see the lecturer who was the index case. We also have 1 person who has been tested positive to the COVID-19, who was on self-isolation, and a total of 22 people have been confirmed to date. And next, here are some updates on our imported cases. Today, we had 21 imported cases, and 7 of them have been reported at the points of entry, while 14 of them have been spotted while on self-quarantine. 14 of them were foreigners, and about the countries that they were from, 11 from America, and 9 from the USA, and also we had 2 from Russia, 2 from Uzbekistan, and so forth. During the past day yesterday, we had 164 ships that have embarked in South Korea, and we carried out onboard quarantine for about 67 of them. And the CDCH currently carries out close monitoring of the situation of the global pandemic, and we have identified 6 high-risk countries of infections. And we have also, starting from July 13th, we have mandated all of the foreign entrants coming from all countries to submit PCR negative documents. And also we have added 2 more countries to be subject under such a policy starting from the 22nd of July. And as for all of the foreign entrants that have entered from these 6 countries amount to 548, and a majority of them, 512, have submitted the PCR negative document, and among them, 9 of them have been ordered to be sent back to their country because they lacked such a document. And as for the countries with grace period, we also carried out PCR testings here in South Korea. And among them, 22 have been confirmed with the COVID-19, with some being reported at the points of entry as well. 36 people did not submit these PCR testings, and there were some people transitioning from making transit from the Philippines, and there were 2 toddlers as well. So these were the updates on our intensified quarantine measures for the imported cases. Moreover, we also identified the number of foreigners foreigners who are being confirmed with the COVID-19 is decreasing on a regular basis, and we will continue to monitor closely the situations of the outbreak abroad, and we will also exert our full efforts to curb the further spread of the COVID-19 stemming from the imported cases. And next is the updates on the return of the 365 South Korean construction workers from Iraq. And still right now we have 95 confirmed cases of the COVID-19 cases total, with no additional confirmed cases made so far. And here are some updates on our R&D process. About 1,365 people who have fully recovered from COVID-19 have expressed intentions to donate their plasma samples. And a total of 765 people have actually donated their blood, and we are under process in developing our treatment systems for these blood plasma. And about 24 people have administered such a plasma treatment to date. And as for the antibody treatment, we are exerting our full efforts to make the treatment, and we are carrying out the first phase of the clinical trial. And also we have the trial that is going on in the UK as well. Also, this is under development. And next, as for the remdesivir, a total of 108 people have been administered with the drug so far here in South Korea. And next are some updates on our live quarantine measures. The Ministry of Safety is also running a safety e-report, and we have received some reports of the breaches of the quarantine measures, and there are some examples as follows. There were examples of where people did not wear face masks, and they carried out close contact and also dialogue within the coffee shops for a long period of time, about 5 to 6 hours, and they were not controlled by the managers of the coffee shops. And also at some restaurants, when they were using the shared objects, they did not place plastic gloves or disposable gloves. So these were some of the examples that were reported as the breaches of the live quarantine measures. So we continue to ask for all of the members of the public to abide by these live quarantine measures, including the wearing a face mask. And also, you need to at all times wear your face mask, even at cafes and restaurants, aside from the moments that when you are consuming food. And also, when you are eating or drinking, please refrain from engaging in conversations that could increase the risks of droplet infection. And also, when you are talking on the phone, please talk with your mask on, or you should talk on the phone outside. And we have seen continued downpour, and we have seen a large number of people who have been victimized, and we extend our deepest condolences to those who have deceased and the members of the bereaved families. We also send our words of comfort for those who have been victims and who has been evacuated to the temporary shelters, and we continue to ask you to comply with the COVID-19 prevention guidelines in temporary shelter as well. As for the managers of these shelters, they need to check the user's temperature on a regular basis and regularly disinfect surfaces as well. And also, as for the users, we ask you to continue to wear your face mask and keep a 2-meter distance from others. And also, it is very important for us to exert our full efforts to prevent waterborne infections diseases as well. Please remember, you need to also discard all of the food that have been left in your homes after your homes have been flooded. So, and you, after touching the water that has been flooded, you need to wash your hands with soap and clean water, because all of the chemical pollutants as well as other viruses and germs could be included in these rainwater. So you need to also be careful of that as well, and you need to refrain from drinking from tap water and also drink bottled water instead. And last but not least, in relation to the briefing, we have an update. Right now, as for the COVID-19 briefing, we have seen an increase in the number of COVID-19 pandemic globally. What is common around the world is the fact that many countries that have eased their lockdowns are seeing a resurgence of the virus. And this shows also that some countries that have been called as great models for the COVID-19 response. And here in South Korea, we have experienced an exponential surge, actually twice of them. First, until when in the mid-February, when we had a stabilizing case of the imported cases. After the 31st case here in South Korea, we've seen the exponential surge in the number of outbreaks centering around Daegu City, and also thanks to the public's efforts to contain the virus, we were able to decrease the number of the confirmed cases. However, we also had a moment of calmness after that. However, another surge began starting from early May, centering around a nightlife entertainment venue in Itaewon here in South Korea as well. When we see a decrease in the number of COVID-19 confirmed cases, and this is very important period of time, if we stay complacent, we will be victimized to the virus. We shall not repeat our mistakes of the past. Within August, as we enjoy our vacation and summer holidays, how well we spend this month, also many things will depend on the future of the COVID-19, especially during autumn and winter. If the situations here in South Korea exacerbate, we believe that this will bring a great burden to our medical capacity and management, and this will also restrict the amount of medical services for people suffering from other diseases. And we believe that this will bring a big social chaos in the future. And we believe that the people with the chronic illnesses and the seniors, as well as the pregnant women and the weak people, they will be mostly victimized by the virus. So we need to prevent that from happening as well. As you saw in the case of many advanced countries already, we shall not go through such social chaos. And at the center of such chaos lies the valuable lives of our citizens. And therefore, we are also continuing to roll out our quarantine disciplines for the public. And we are also having the safety e-report to respond to the number of breaches of these quarantine measures. However, more importantly is the participation and cooperation by the members of the public. You should always remember the cases of February and May here in South Korea, and we also need to continue to experience the distancing and wearing a face mask going forward. Thank you very much.
Right, there was Kwon Junuk, the Vice Head of KCDC, with Tuesday's afternoon briefing. So I understand he spoke a lot about local infections.
Right, because we are seeing a rise in local transmissions in the metropolitan region especially. So let's take a look at those. We have 2 additional cases related to a coffee shop and restaurant in southern Seoul. That brings the total to at least 12. And it looks like people who were at a meeting at that cafe did not wear their masks properly, which seems to have contributed to this rise in these cases. And then we have a case related to a unit in Pocheon, a military unit in Pocheon, Gyeonggi-do Province, where 1 additional case has been confirmed, bringing that total to 22. And according to the Defense Ministry earlier in the day, there was also 1 additional case at the Defense Security Support Command in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi-do Province. So we have a total of 79 related to military cases. And of course, we also have infections from abroad, but those were in the double digits, similar to yesterday.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
A growing number of at-home leisure activities are making a comeback as many choose to spend their time indoors amid fears of contagion. We have details in this next report.
With more and more people now staying indoors amid COVID-19, activities you can enjoy from the comfort of your own home are rising in popularity. Indoor gardening is one such hobby. This large gardening center in Paju is bustling even on a weekday morning.
코로나 전과 비교해서 주문도 많이 늘었고 방문하셔서 구입하시는 분들도 많이 늘었어요.
According to a local online shopping mall, the sales of houseplants have nearly doubled in the period between March 13th and April 12th, compared to the same period last year.
처음에는 관심이 없었는데 이제 코로나 때문에 화분을 하나 두 개씩 키우다 보니까 식물이 이렇게 잎도 하나씩 새순이 돋아가는 그런 모습을 집에서 보니까 제 마음에 좀 힐링이 되더라고요.
펫플랜트라고 그래요. 펫플랜트. 나와 같이 살아가는 반려식물이 되는 거예요. 나랑 친구도 될 수 있고 대화도 할 수 있고 식물은 시기가 되면 뭐 열매도 열리고 꽃도 피고 뭐 그런 변화가 있잖아요. 그냥 가만히 있는 게 아니라 이런 걸 보면서 우리한테 많은 뭐 즐거움도 주고 보람도 느끼게 하는 것 같아요.
In fact, growing a houseplant has been proven by science to be an effective way of relaxing your mind and body. There is even a treatment method called horticultural therapy, in which patients engage in gardening and plant-based activities. So for those struggling to cope with the coronavirus blues, raising a houseplant could do wonders for your mental health. Knitting has also become popular amid COVID-19, which has traditionally been a classic wintertime hobby. So why are so many people taking up knitting in the middle of summer? According to figures from a Korean logistics firm, the delivery of knitting supplies between March and April jumped by 95% compared to the same period last year. Kim Dae-ri is a YouTuber who uploads knitting videos with 120,000 subscribers, who also runs a store for knitting supplies. She's enjoying every minute of it.
요즘에 구독자분들도 많이 늘어나면서 저희 매장 가면 저 알아보시는 분들도 되게 많고 전화로 구매 어떻게 하냐 아니면 뭐부터 사야 되냐 이런 되게 초보분들이 많이 하실 법한 질문들을 전화로 많이 주시더라고요. 그래서 그런 거 보고 아, 신규 유입자가 많이 늘어나긴 했구나 이런 생각이 들었어요. 여름에 코로나 제일 피크일 때는 그때가 3월 달이었던 걸로 제가 기억하는데 한 작년 대비해서 3배 정도 늘었고요.
So what's the link between COVID-19 and the sudden boom in knitting?
뜨개질은 집에서 진짜 편하고 쉽게 오래오래 할 수 있는 활동이기 때문에 뭔가 코로나 계기로 해서 조금 더 뜨개질 하시는 분들이 많아진 것 같은 느낌이 들어요. 실생활에서 실제로 사용할 수 있는 것들을 직접 떠서 그냥 만드는 걸로 그치지 않고 실제로 사용할 수 있다는 그런 장점이 있거든요.
Interestingly, Finland's snowboarding coach has used knitting as a way to keep his athletes calm. He was spotted at the 2014 Sochi and 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games, knitting casually to keep himself and his team relaxed. Protecting yourself from COVID-19 starts off with a healthy mind. So why not take up an indoor hobby to keep your mind and body in good shape?
Observers believe COVID-19 will further weigh on declining birth rates around the world. Now, stability and predictability are important factors in family planning, and concerns over the pandemic are leading to delayed decisions regarding childbirth. What's more, the looming demographic crisis is expected to have an extensive impact on the economy. For more on this, I have Professor Song Soo-young from Chungang University. Good to see you again, Professor Song.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me again. Yeah.
And I also have Professor Yang Hee-dong from Ewha Women's University.
Hi,
Welcome back,
again.
Professor Yang. Professor Song, do start us off by clarifying the relationship between a declining economy and the declining, that is, population and the health of an economy.
Yeah, clearly the demographic change, particularly the falling birth rate and increase of the death rate, our aging population must have a negative impact. But however, this is as predicted, and so I think it could have a very long-term and some steadfast effect, negative impact on the economy. But however, as long as the economy grows and some new economic opportunities appear in the future, and then as long as we can create, with the help of the government policy and some private sectors, some intuition and intuitive creation, then we could make more advance and to overcome the falling negative impact of the demographic change.
Right. Professor Yang, perhaps you could now link the relationship of the pandemic to declining birth rates for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you take a look at the past histories of a pandemic disease in the global world, in 2002 we had SARS, and 2015 we had Zika virus in Brazil, and both countries had a very dramatic decrease in their populations. And in Korea, in 2003 we had also SARS, and 2015 we had the MERS. In both 2 years, our populations decreased by 0.03 to 1.16, and the year 2016 was even dramatic because the birth rate was decreased by 0.07 to 1.17. So we can tell that absolutely this pandemic disease has critical and negative impact on the population increase.
Professor Song, the actual impact of the pandemic on birth rates will probably be visible later on this year. Having said that, when can we expect to see the tangible effect of a declining population on our economy?
Yeah, pandemic impact on the economy and the birth rate, falling birth rate is, we have to see, but I think it will be transitory or temporary depending upon the government lockdown policy and some containment policy against pandemic coronavirus spread out. So whether the government policy turns out to be a success or failure, that will determine the birth rate. But however, interestingly, I have seen this the survey and article about the impact of coronavirus 19 on the fertility plans in the European countries, including Italy and Spain and the United Kingdom and Germany and France. And then the research has shown that very interesting result, particularly in Italy, is very pronounced, the abandonment of the fertility plan. The couples who have a fertility plan in early January in 2020, then observing the outbreak of the pandemic virus, then mostly almost 30% of the couples decided to abandon the fertility plan. So at least that the reason why it happens is depending upon the demographic and some social and economic situation may differ from among the countries. Particularly in Italy, very interestingly, the older generations who are supposed to take care of the offsprings and the grandsons and daughters, they are infected by the coronavirus, then the couples do not have some parents to take care of their sons and daughters. That's why one of the reasons. And in particular in the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom is the most liberal welfare state, which means the welfare services are provided by government the least, because the United Kingdom does not have large enough welfare infrastructure for the people, less than the other countries. Then United Kingdom has, because of the economic uncertainty and the reduced income and the job loss, could have some negative impact on the decision of a fertility plan among the couples. So Altogether, I think whether the impact of the pandemic virus could have some permanent or transitory, that is all up to some government policy and whether the containment policy turns out to be successful or not.
Right. Now, for a broader perspective on the economic impact of declining birth rates, I have Rajiv Biswas from IHS Markit in Singapore live on the line. Hello, Mr. Biswas.
Hello.
Is Singapore facing a similar fate? Is the economy there looking to be negatively affected perhaps by the falling birth rates in light of the pandemic, Mr. Biswas?
Well, Singapore has a demographic problem. Even before the pandemic, it was clear that one of the big problems facing Singapore over the next 2 decades is the aging population and the very low birth rate. But Singapore has traditionally had a very high share of foreign workers who act as a safety valve for the overall working population. When you bring in the impact of the pandemic, it has created tremendous disruption to the economy and also affected the flow of these foreign workers because the borders have been closed and foreign workers are not allowed to enter without permission. So at least during the pandemic, there's also a further disruption to the whole structure of the labor force. And it's also not clear how long the pandemic will continue and how long this disruption will impact on the labor force in Singapore.
Mr. Biswas, I also understand that COVID-19 has pushed Singapore into recession for the first time since the global financial crisis. Please tell us more about this.
Well, the Singapore economy, like many others around the world, had a very deep contraction in the second quarter. The GDP fell by about 12% year on year in the second quarter. And the first quarter was also negative. So overall, the economy is in recession. And this will be one of the deepest recessions in the whole Asia-Pacific region because Singapore's economy is so globally focused. It's very dependent on international movement of people. Tourism is an important sector. And of course, there's no domestic tourism because Singapore is so small. Tourism is all international. So tourism has collapsed. Business travel has collapsed. Conventions type activity also is zero right now. So all of these things are really hurting the economy. The aviation sector is also important for Singapore, and there's no sign of any significant recovery there either. So that is why Singapore's economy is likely to face one of the deepest recessions in the whole Asia-Pacific region.
Mr. Biswas, I'd like to direct your attention now to Korea because the country, for its part, performed relatively better when compared to some of its global counterparts. What is the assessment of Korea's economy in the international arena?
I think South Korea's economy is very resilient in this pandemic because the domestic economy has still held up very well because the pandemic has been kept under control, at least so far in South Korea, very well. So that means domestic consumption, domestic manufacturing activity has continued. There was a very deep decline in exports in the first half of this year, but as lockdowns are being eased in the major markets like the US and Europe, that is also now allowing some recovery in the export sector over the second half of this year. So overall, we think that South Korea will be relatively resilient, still a recession, but a relatively mild recession in South Korea compared to deep recessions in countries like Singapore, Japan, and India.
All right, Mr. Biswas, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this hour with your thoughts. Right, Professor Yang, as our Mr. Biswas has mentioned, Singapore's economy dropped by 12.6% on year. The US saw a plunge of 33% on year. How do you assess in general the overall global economic state?
Well, actually, this number, I mean, the reduction of the US GDP by 32.9% is quite confusing because Israel and US may be two countries who calculated GDP growth by the annualized numbers. The annualized numbers means you can calculate your GDP growth rate by quarter right, compared to the previous quarter. And then you multiply that number by 4 times to calculate the expected, the annual growth rate, right, pertaining to the current, the quarterly growth. Whereas Korea calculates our GDP growth compared to previous, the quarter. So yes, the Korea has recorded about 3.3 negative minus growth in the second quarter. U.S. About 9.5, and even Germany is even worse, by minus 10.1. So my point is we do not need to get confused with this, the large numbers. 33. In other words, if we standardize the growth rate by the quarterly growth rate compared to the previous year, you can tell that the U.S. has recorded 9.5 minus. Particularly their low hit was in May. So we can tell that this is kind of the base effect, because they recorded very year low in May. They're coming back, right, to June. So many people may have developed some positive estimation for the future of the global economy because we believe that the ground hit is in May. But that's what happens in the future.
Right. Professor Song, Mr. Biswas linked Korea's economic performance to its containment efforts. Do you see a link between these economic numbers and perhaps the country's respective responses to COVID-19?
Particularly the very big negative numbers in the United States, as the Professor Yang pointed out that the year-on-year growth rate negative is for the United States is minus 9.5%. And even Germany has recorded less than as much as minus 10.1 percentage points. But the problem is, because of this happens because of the lockdown policy adopted by the government. So lockdown policy must have a negative impact on the demand and supply simultaneously. Therefore, the reduction of the growth rate is very large necessarily. However, whether the issue is whether in Germany, because of they expect some rebound of the economy, very strong rebound. The reason is because the containment policy by the Germany has turns out to be a success because of there is a very declining of some case of the pandemic case. But whereas in the United States, the pandemic case has shown the increasing number. And in Japan also increasing, in India. And so those countries who have failed to contain the spread of the pandemic policy, necessarily they have suffered some prolonged some economic recession. However, in Germany, we expect some recovery, rebound, strong rebound in the consumption and also supply, manufacturing. So the same is the case for Korea. That's why the international economists and other people regard Korean economy is very resilient and very positive. And among the OECD countries, we have recorded the best. Who is better than us is actually China. The reason China has shown positive 3.2% growth rate is because they start with some pandemic spread in Wuhan last year. Then their containment policy turns out to be a success, and now economy is in some recovery path. That's why some prospect of the Chinese economy is expected to be very positive, and it could have a positive impact on the international trade. However, because of the China and the U.S. conflict of trade could have they have dropped some dark shadow on the international trade. Therefore, for example, the Singapore economy really has suffered so much, and the impact would remain very prolongedly, very long negative impact on the economy because international trade, because they have in Singapore has domestic economy is very small, only rely on, as the Rajiv mentioned, there is zero convention to take place in Singapore, which means that tourism economy, that is the main source of the Singapore domestic economy. So that's why the Singapore has suffered so much from
I see.
Yeah.
Professor Young, as Professor Song just mentioned, Korea's latest economic data show an increase in Korea's consumption, investment and industrial output. Is Korea on the road to recovery, would you say, or is it too early to say?
Well, I would just say that it is too early to conclude that way because, again, there is a base effect. We had a very low hit in May, and every economic indicators were really low in May. So even though we can tell that in June compared to early month and May, the consumption has increased by 2.4. I mean, production increased by 4.2. Investment increased by 5.4. That's okay, but that, of course, again, were compared to the earlier month, which is May. So that's what happens in the future because so far our government has done a very good job. They had done a very superb the complementary budget plans in early year, and that is the result, right? All these positive economic results were the products of the Korean government proactive the budget plan. So that's what happens in the future because the Korean government plans to, use another the complementary budget since in June and July. So, well, personally, our economic condition could be better than in May and June.
So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's what happens. But let me maintain a very positive posture
for
the future.
All right, Professor Young, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Song, as always, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, it's time to say goodbye for today. Tomorrow, we take a look at the diplomatic achievements secured by Korea amid the pandemic. In the meantime, do take care and do reach out to us with your thoughts and inquiries. Thank you for being with us.